The Federal Election Commission, the agency that oversees political spending, will for all intent and purposes close its doors New Year's Eve. The Democratic-led Congress is in a standoff with President Bush over the confirmations of the group's nominees. The FEC will have just 2 members at the start of 2008. That's 4 votes short of what's needed to take any official action. You know, we want to know what's on your mind this election season. And if you have a campaign question or issue you want covered, all you need to do is email us at weekendlive@foxnews.com. We very much enjoy having your comments. We're going to go over some of these comments in the days ahead. We'll answer maybe some of them at the end of the newscast. So feel free to give us a call or give us a note at weekendlive@foxnews.com. Email's very important to us. Your opinions are very important to us, and we want to know what you think about this election season or whatever else is on your mind. I just got an email from someone who said they're going to make cornbread dressing at their home tomorrow from my old favorite recipe, so we look forward to that. All right, bad news all around, as we said, for Rudy Giuliani. Fresh Fox polls show the Republican presidential hopeful is now in a statistical tie with 2 other Republican candidates. Take a look at the numbers. Pretty interesting. Giuliani has dropped at one point from 33% nationally in the middle of November to 20% this week. And you can see who picked up the points. It's mostly Mike Huckabee. The former Arkansas governor jumped 11 points. And then you see Romney doing also about 20. Really a statistical tie when you look at the total race. The former New York mayor ended up in the hospital, as you mentioned, with flu-like symptoms. So with a week and a half to go until the Iowa caucus, can Rudy rebound? Republican strategist Jason Roe and Democratic strategist Alexandra Acker are here with us to give us their thoughts. It's good to have you in the studio today. Thanks for joining us. You look at that Republican, Jason, you look at that Republican poll. It shows basically it's a statistical 3-way tie. Now, this is nationwide. In Iowa, there are certain things happening. In New Hampshire, certain things happening. When you look at those numbers, it shows a very close race. Are you surprised by that?
I'm not really surprised because as much as Giuliani had the veneer of being a national frontrunner, there wasn't a national campaign going on. There are several gubernatorial campaigns going on, frankly, in the early states. And those numbers were going to level out as people learned more about Rudy Giuliani. His best day was the day he got in the race, when people remembered the things they wanted to remember about him and probably forgotten or were unaware of his positions on some of the vote determinative issues like guns, abortion, and gay marriage.
When you look, I know you're a Democratic strategist, but when you look across the aisle and you see those numbers, what do you draw from it?
Well, you know, I'm a New Yorker. I remember the Rudy Giuliani of September 10th. He was a very divisive mayor. There were a lot of things about his mayoral tenure that New Yorkers didn't like, and I think Americans are starting to more closely scrutinize his record. I do think it is natural coming into the end of the cycle here that the race tightens up. I'm not surprised at all that Republican-based voters are having second thoughts about Rudy Giuliani and his record, not only on social issues, but on everything from taxes to crime.
Last time I looked at the Democratic numbers, it still showed that nationwide Hillary had a pretty strong lead. But when you start looking in Iowa, when you start looking at New Hampshire, things have tightened up significantly. What do you think is going on there?
I do think it is natural on both sides to have that tighten up as we get closer to the election. Obviously, John Edwards has always had a very strong base of support in Iowa.
Some people are saying don't count him out, that he might come from behind and win this one.
I certainly wouldn't. I would predict that Iowa's going to be very close among those top 3 candidates on the Democratic side. And then we'll look to see what happens in New Hampshire. But I don't think that we're necessarily going to know who our nominee is going to be until February 5th.
And here's the question we need to start thinking about. How important is it really, the wins in Iowa and the wins in New Hampshire? I mean, first thing that happens is everybody focuses on the winner. That's all that the media talks about, who won. And so therefore they start to get a little buzz and a little more momentum. Is it impossible to change the direction once somebody starts racking up 1, 2, 3 wins?
You could tell better than we can. I think the media has a lot of control over the perception that comes out of Iowa.
But really, it's a small number of people who are making these decisions.
It is, and it's a very tight turnaround to New Hampshire. I'm not sure the candidate's going to get the bounce they're counting on.
I think that's the key point. This is a more compressed primary than we've ever had before, and you don't have time to correct the ship. You don't have 2 weeks until the next primary to try to fix things. You're going to create a momentum that is largely shaped by the media and is going to determine kind of what your sentiment is about a candidate and their strengths as they're rolling into your state.
Prediction on the Republican side, Iowa, New Hampshire.
I think Romney probably will sustain the momentum that he has kept. He stayed pretty flat no matter what's happened in terms of the solid base of support. I think he'll pull it out.
And your thought, Iowa, New Hampshire?
Iowa's going to be neck and neck. I don't think you can call a winner at this point, and I think Hillary Clinton will pull it out in New Hampshire.
All right, we'll leave it right there, Knight. Thank you very much. For the day when partisanship is a thing of the past, but if it were to happen today, would we be ready for it? How could Washington approach in an era of bipartisanship without voters thinking it was all some kind of political scam? Would it be too good to be true? For more, we go back to our panel, Republican strategist Jason Roe and Democratic strategist Alexandra Acker. I asked this question almost tongue-in-cheek because when you talk to voters, you get this continual question about, you know, what's going on in Washington. Why is it so bitter? Why is it so ugly? We've witnessed the Congress, which just got out of town for the holidays, fighting up until the very last minute and finally getting things done, as they always do in the last hour or so of the session. Do you really think that Americans, do you think they're fed up with this? What's your read of the American public right now on these issues?
Well, I think everyone's fed up over it, but I think, one of the things that people fail to appreciate, I think, is the reason for the hyperpartisanship is how narrow the majorities are, how close the elections have been. Back when the Democrats controlled everything 15 years ago, there wasn't that much partisanship because there wasn't really a reason to. But as long as the majorities in the House and the Senate are this narrow and that presidential elections are decided by a couple of points, there's no reason to cede any ground, and I think people are going to continue to fight for every inch that they can get.
Don't you run the risk of having the American people say a pox on all your houses, which means that any time an incumbent runs, they run the risk of getting thrown out of office, whether they're Democrat or Republican?
Well, unfortunately, I think there's not much of a risk of that, and I agree with Jason, but I think one of the biggest problems we see is the gerrymandering of these congressional districts that really force there to be extremes on both sides of the aisle.
So they can do it knowing that there's no penalty for it.
Absolutely. I do think that we've seen a deterioration of bipartisanship in American history overall. The great Senate icons like Robert Byrd are now not the norm as far as reaching across the aisle, and it is a sad day in American politics. I think the country wants it and may not quite be ready for it. May not be ready to elect the kind of leadership that we need in order to make that happen, but it does have to happen on both sides of the aisle, and there has to be the public crying out for it, which we're not seeing just yet.
All right, so when people go to the voting booth, whether it's the primary or the general election, and they're just fed up with politics as usual, what do you think happens?
I think they're going to look for the people that haven't, frankly, been in Washington as long. They're going to look for some kind of an appeal that transcends the partisanship.
Well, now, let me stop you. Is that why we see people who are relatively fresh faces to the American public? I mean, we've seen them here in Washington, but out there in the country, people haven't seen a lot of Mike Huckabee. They haven't seen a lot of Barack Obama. Is that why we see them finding favor in a lot of these polls? I
definitely think it contributes to it, and I think even if you look at Mitt Romney, I mean, these are guys that are outside of the Beltway that have some kind of, experience that is not part of the Washington experience, and I think that there's a lot of appeal to voters that are just kind of disgusted with what's been going on over the last few years.
Yeah, but there are still, we must point out, that these are hard issues sometimes that are discussed here in Washington and around the country. Tough votes have to be made, different ways of looking at it. We're never really going to truly see a return to the kind of bipartisanship we had in a past era, are we?
Well, one can hope. One can hope that we have a perfect storm come together where the American public, our leaders, and the media kind of all stop the cynicism and start trying to bring about the kind of monumental change. All of these issues that we're talking
media?
about.
Wait a minute.
Cynical voters, cynical leaders as well. The kind of issues that we're talking about in this election are only going to be solved with bipartisan legislation.
We thank you very much for joining us here on Weekend Live today. Appreciate your opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you.